Welcome to the Landlord Lease Podcast, a training course for landlords to understand how to create a lease. Sponsored by VeteranLandlord.com. And now your host, Edward O'Daniel.
Hey, landlords. Welcome to the Landlord Lease Podcast, sponsored by VeteranLandlord.com. I am Edward O'Daniel, your host, and I'm totally pumped to come here and bring you some great information regarding lease terms, what they mean, and how you can actually implement this in your business. So right now, what we're looking at here, we're going to be going through our lease terms document here. This document, you don't have to retype it. Please don't. You can just simply go and to VeteranLandlord.com and download this document. It's in Documents Library area underneath the Landlord document. So please, no need to just type or do screenshots because this is a completely free editable document. But right now, what I want to do is go over some of the lease terms that you're going to find commonly in leases, what they mean, and the type of information that you can have inside of these. Now, we're going to break this document up into several different episodes. So right now, rather than listing them by some factor of importance, I've just listed them alphabetically. So these are not how you would normally see them defined in a lease. Typically in a lease, you would have certain terms first, and you can look at those, the lease that we have out there on the VeteranLandlord.com site. But right now, just for the use of this podcast, we're going to simply go alpha A to Z regarding these particular terms. So let's get to it here. The first one we're going to go over is abandonment. Now, this is kind of a interesting lease term because what you need to do is you need to understand what abandonment is. Typically, abandonment is when, if you've ever had this happen to you, where somebody just simply leaves in the middle of the night, maybe they're behind on rent and they pull up a truck, late at night or early in the morning, they pack all their stuff up and then they leave to make sure nobody sees them leave, and they just leave the property. They ghost you. They don't return your phone calls. They don't return your emails. Maybe even they disconnect their phone. But for you, the landlord, you need to have something in your lease that defines abandonment. What does it mean to be abandoned? What does that look like? And for most of the time in your state, you will have an abandonment clause. So I definitely have to recommend you look up your state requirement for this. But typically how we use abandonment in our business is define the terms instead of abandonment for in the state of Missouri, which is where I'm located. Our state has abandonment that requirements. It specifically states that a particular person has to be behind on rent more than 30 days. So that's one requirement for abandonment. So they have to owe you rent for more than 30 days, and you actually have to post a notice on the door. You have to actually go and post a notice that, I feel that this property has been abandoned. There's a form that you use from the state. Your state could be different, so please check into that. And once you post that, you have to actually wait 10 days. And if you do not get in contact, or if the tenant doesn't contact you, or the resident, doesn't contact you, I may use those terms interchangeably, that what you can do is you can now go back in, change the locks, and reclaim that particular property. Now, this could be very beneficial to you as a landlord because this may actually help you without having to go through eviction and legal means to obtain your property in case somebody just simply leaves. Now, they're going to leave or abandon the property if they simply look in the window and you see all their stuff is gone. Well, how do you handle that? And you want to make sure that you define what abandonment is inside of your lease. That way, the resident knows whenever they move in that this is what's going to happen. And then upon abandonment, for instance, what's going to happen to all the stuff that's left in the property here? Whose is that? And that's one of the things you really have to check with your state to make sure that, is this going to be a property that you have to hold and you have to actually wait for them to maybe come back and get it? Or does that property become yours automatically upon abandonment? So that's what the abandonment clause really is. It just defines those particular terms for your state, what that means. And that could be a very good clause to reclaim a property in case you can't get somebody out or somebody stops paying rent and so forth. We've used that many times in the past to reclaim properties when the person moved out and they just don't want to contact you anymore because they're most likely obviously embarrassed that they had to be put out and they couldn't afford to pay their rent. So next thing we're going to talk about is access to premises. This is going to be very important because you want to make sure that's defined of when you're allowed to go in and take a look at the property. Now, whenever you sign a lease, the home or the place that they're renting actually becomes their place. It becomes theirs legally through the lease. but you need to sit back and define the terms by which, when can I come into the property? When can I go in and take a look? What does that scheduling look like here? Typically in our lease, it's a 24 hours notice. Please check your state rules on that one. But if you're going to schedule and go through and do an inspection, you have to give at least some kind of notice, and that notice needs to be defined in your lease. So access to premises is where you would actually do that. Now, one of the things you can do in here also is you can state in this particular area that access to premises can be done immediately if there is imminent damage to the property going to happen. Like, for instance, what if there's a plumbing leak and somebody's gone and water is leaking? If it's an apartment building, maybe leaking into the unit below you, and somebody's not at home to do that. Well, you can get into your property right away through this and let the resident know via your lease that this right here is something that I can enter your property immediately if there's property damage going on. So again, access to premises, this is where you would define that. And just all your notices upon doing your inspections here. This way, if you ever have a problem, if you do want to go inspect your property, whether the resident is home or not, all you have to do is give notice. I gave you a 24 hours notice. This is also where you would put what type of notices are allowed. So you can state, can you text? Can you email? Does your state allow for that? So right now, versus having to send them a letter or do certified mail to instruct them and let them know, can you just send them an email or a text message? Hey, we're going to do an inspection the day after tomorrow on your particular property here at 3 p.m. So, please have somebody home. If not, we will come in and do the inspection. But this way, you know that you have the legal right to do that because it's in your access to premises section of your lease. Next, we're going to talk about is alterations. Now, alterations are things that your resident can do to the property once they move in. Now, this is where you would define what they're allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do. Typically, when somebody moves in, they're not going to come in and most likely repaint, but you can have something in your alterations if they're allowed to repaint, or you say, yes, you're allowed to paint as long as you paint it back to this color upon your leaving, something like that. But alterations could also be hanging pictures, putting nails in the wall, hanging up blinds, replacing light fixtures, things like that. So alterations need to be clearly defined of what you're allowing somebody to do, or if you just want to simply say, no alteration to this property will be done without management's express written permission, something like that. So that way they have to send you a communication each time they want to make a change, and those changes have to be approved prior to them going and actually implementing and doing it. Because if they just come, put a bunch of nail holes and put up things to change light fixtures from a light to a ceiling fan, or change the ceiling fan out to something that they have and it's not what you originally had in there, those are alterations. And again, some of the other things you want to do with alterations, depending upon what you allow, you may want that alteration to either be reversed at move out, which has to be defined. So if they're going to do an alteration, they have to set back the way it originally was when they move in, or you can simply state in your alterations that if they do make that change, that they're not allowed to move it out, that they have to leave that as a permanent fixture of the property, and it will be at their expense. So that's another one. Whose expense is this? Do they expect to get reimbursed? They're going to get a rent reduction, or just completely at their cost? So alterations is really where you define all of those communications and things with the tenants. Next thing is appliances. Appliances are going to be, this is, if you've been a landlord for any length of time, appliances can be a pain. People sometimes really beat up appliances, beat up the refrigerator, dishwashers, microwaves, stoves, and really damage things. So right now, we have a pretty aggressive, at least for us, we have a pretty aggressive appliances clause that kind of just states that appliances are there for your convenience, that if they do need to be repaired, that you'd be responsible for the first X number of dollars of that particular repair. And that can kind of help minimize your costs in case they beat things up. Again, that's going to be up to your discretion whether or not you charge them for them or you get it fixed. But appliances is where you simply define not only what appliances are going to come with the particular property. So you want to make sure that you define that. So if you have a stove, refrigerator, and dishwasher, when they moved in, you want to make sure that's in your lease that says, here are the appliances that were in there in case they take something out. For instance, it wouldn't be the first time somebody moved out and took a refrigerator with them and said, well, the refrigerator was there when you moved in. It wasn't yours to move. That needs to be included and charged back to them if that would be the case. So having all the appliances listed, what the repairs look like, how those things are going to happen are all in the appliances lease clause. So that can definitely save you a lot of time. I can tell you right now, I didn't have one of these when I first got started. So right now I was paying for everything with particular refrigerators when they beat things up. And it was really kind of a nightmare, and it kind of ate into my cash flow and my bottom line until I finally put an appliance clause in there, found somebody that had one. It made sense. I put it in my lease. And then from that point on, the residents were responsible for so much of the repair, which reduced my which increased my bottom line and my cash flow. So automatic lease renewal. So this right here, in this particular lease, depending upon how you want to write it, you may want to have, well, at the end of the lease term, this particular lease automatically renews for X number of months, another year. You can also define anything regarding the lease renewals, from the term, how long it goes out, to the rent increase. Maybe it's a certain percentage that you're going to increase it. It could be a certain fixed rate. But all of those things are defined in here so that at the end of the lease term, if you don't want to generate a new lease, so if your lease hasn't changed much, and you just want to keep the existing lease, then if they don't move out or give you the proper notice that they're going to be moving out, then this lease automatically renews upon the terms and conditions inside of it. And that's that. So just make sure you define all the terms in there very clearly. Make sure that if you're going to include one of these in your lease, that you do put in some form of increase with this, because this could really hurt you if you're going to keep it at the same lease rate and lock that in for the next 12 months. If that's your lease term, then you can't increase the rent. You can't do anything because it's already defined inside of your lease what the automatic lease renewal is. So that may be good or bad too. So if you don't want these particular people, if they've been a pain, then you might not want an automatic lease renewal for them. So again, you need to make sure that you either put it in there, put the right things that you want inside of the automatic lease renewal, or just don't include it at all and just have to go through and make sure that you check your leases every month on which ones are expiring, and then you manually do that every single month. Awesome. So next thing we're going to talk about is the condition of the property here. Condition of the property is where, depending upon where you're at, some areas do require inspections, which we'll get to in another lease clause, but some properties, and depending on your state or even your city, some have to be inspected, others do not before people move in. So the condition of the property, you just want to make sure that whatever that condition is, that it's clearly stated that people are taking this property in as is condition. So this is you're not going to move somebody in and then expect them the residents are not going to expect you to do thousands of dollars worth of update to get stuff done. They are taking the property in the current condition. This is what they're going to do. This is what they're going to pay for, and so forth. So you want to make sure that you have something in there that indicates that, as well as they're going to return that property in the same condition the day that you gave it to them in. So if it was clean, if everything was ready, if the blinds were in great shape, then you're going to get that property back in the same condition. So right now, I think this is sort of a good stopping point here for this episode. We're going to go over many more, but just I want to just thank you guys so much for checking in. Hopefully, this is going to be a great learning experience as we go through the several other episodes here and go through the remaining of these particular lease terms. But guys, thanks so much. And just remember to check us out at veteranlandlord.com.
Thank you for listening to the Landlord Lease Podcast. To get your free lease and other training material, visit us at veteranlandlord.com and create your free account. If you find this material valuable, we'd appreciate it if you can share this podcast with others and leave us a great review.